As I was being wheeled down the hall, I'm thinking like, I'm gonna have a baby in this chair, right here, right now. Hello everybody, it's Delilah and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is one that I have been so looking forward to filming, and I'm so excited to be sitting here sharing Annabeth's birth story with you today. I don't know when you're actually going to see this video. At the time of filming this, she's only 6 days old, and I wanted to sit down and film this before I start to forget some of those details, before everything kind of turns into a big blur in my head. Her birth story was a miracle. Everything about it was a miracle. It is a story of God's goodness and grace and His loving kindness. His hand was so clearly over us the entire time, the way everything worked out. Like, it's just, I see God's hand so clearly at work in all of my births. I've had very different experiences, and through it all, the good and the bad, God's hand is so clearly just over us. I'm so excited to share this crazy story with you. I'm gonna give a brief recap of the pregnancy. If you've been following along for this pregnancy, then you know all of this. But I feel like the birth itself is so much more impactful if you know the story leading up to it. So at 20 weeks, I was diagnosed with placenta previa. Placenta previa is when the cervix is either touching or covering the cervix. It's a very common condition, but it can pose a lot of risks. Typically, the placenta will move up and away as the uterus expands, as the baby grows. That placenta usually moves out of the way, and it's really not a big deal. But there are cases when the placenta does not move away, and then it becomes a little bit more high risk. But the doctors don't worry about it too much at the 20-week point. They schedule a follow-up ultrasound within like 6 weeks or so to check up on things and to see how things are going. And at that checkup, as we walked into that building, I heard the Lord say, "Do you trust me?" And I didn't think much about it at that time, but after we got the news that the placenta had not moved, and that this was suddenly a more high-risk pregnancy, and that the chances of me having a C-section and a preemie baby were pretty high, I broke down and I surrendered everything to the Lord, and everything from that point on was just such a journey. We had many follow-up ultrasounds. The first couple follow-up ultrasounds were disappointing news. Placenta hadn't moved. We had a C-section booked at, I think 37 weeks was the latest I could possibly book a C-section. I don't remember how far along I was. I think I was about 35 weeks when I went in for another follow-up ultrasound. And at this point, it's very highly unlikely that the placenta moves. Like, if the placenta doesn't move by that like 30-week point, the chances of it moving are extremely slim. But our doctor didn't give up on us. She still had hope for us, and so we went into this ultrasound, and by the grace of God, that placenta moved. It miraculously moved 11 millimeters away, which is just barely in that window of it might be possible to have a vaginal delivery. Our doctor is one of very few doctors in the area who will actually give the go-ahead for a vaginal delivery or a trial of labor if the placenta is 11 millimeters to 20 millimeters away, because there are some recent studies that show that it's not actually all that risky. Of course, I needed to be at the hospital, I needed to be closely monitored, and in the case that something happened, it was immediate, like, emergency surgery, and I knew all of that, and I was okay with all of that. I was just so beyond thrilled that I could actually have a chance at having a vaginal delivery. I wanted that so bad. After the previous experience with the C-section, recovery was tough for me, and I really wanted to experience a vaginal delivery again. Over the next few weeks, there were some more bumps in the road, but ultimately we were able to cancel all scheduled C-sections and just wait for spontaneous labor to start. And given my previous history of fast deliveries. I was a little bit on edge, especially with my condition. It had been 4 years since my body had been in labor, since I had given birth, and so I really wasn't sure what to expect. Previously, my labors just really caught me off guard. They were very sudden. This time around, I had been having some contractions. I think it started around, the Braxton Hicks started around 38 weeks, I think. And then every night for about an hour, I would get contractions. They were very mild. There were a couple that were starting to get a little bit more painful, but I knew that they were not anything like real labor contractions. And so my body was working on things and things were happening, but I had never experienced this before. It started playing mind games with me a little bit. I really thought by the amount of pressure that I was feeling and everything that I was feeling within my body, I really felt like labor was near. Every night I went to bed expecting to be woken up with contractions, and I never was. Fast forward to my due date. When I woke up in the morning, I felt a little different. I felt mildly crampy. I went to the bathroom and there was quite a bit of bloody show, which was something I hadn't had at all until now. This was the first time throughout the entire pregnancy that I had had any form of bleeding whatsoever, which also in itself was a miracle considering my condition. So I knew this was a good sign. I knew that this meant labor was near. And so I spent that entire day just really trying to distract myself, to keep my hands busy, to keep my thoughts busy. I baked bread. I got out in the garden with my kids. We picked cucumbers. I think we even made pickles. Like, we were just doing a whole bunch of stuff, trying to keep my mind off things, keeping my body active but not too active, just being busy and preoccupied. That was the best thing for me at that point. The bloody show continued all day. I was having mild contractions sporadically here and there all day. And as the evening drew closer, things started to feel a little more different. And now this is, like I said, the first time I've ever felt anything like this. All my labors have caught me off guard completely. But this time I knew something was gonna happen that night. Zach was actually supposed to go out with a friend that night. He was supposed to go golfing. And I was telling him how I felt, and he didn't feel comfortable leaving me at that point, so he canceled those plans. And then we made other plans to go for ice cream with Zach's family. The contractions became more frequent, still completely random, like an hour apart. But they were also becoming a little bit stronger. And the bloody show hadn't slowed down. It was still coming. And so I mentioned this to Zach and I said, I think we'll probably be okay, but at the same time, I don't know. So we ended up canceling those plans too. We stayed home. We just kind of spent some time together as a family. And then right before we put the kids to bed, I had a contraction that had me like on my hands and knees. A contraction that was much stronger than anything else I had had thus far. We told the kids, you might wake up to Gammy and Pop-Pum in the house tomorrow because Mommy and Daddy might be going to the hospital tonight. And we got to tuck them in and we got to say goodnight to them one last time. For the rest of the evening, I just kind of bounced on my ball. We watched a little TV. I had a few more contractions, but they weren't super intense. They were definitely stronger than they had been previous evenings, but not real labor contractions yet. And they were about like 20 minutes apart. So I knew labor hadn't started yet, but things were happening. For some reason, I had been awake at 4 a.m. that morning and I was exhausted. So I thought, if I'm gonna have a baby tonight, I'm gonna need some sleep. So we packed up the car. We were that certain that something was going to happen. We packed everything up and I went to bed, and I was just about asleep when I was awoken by a very strong contraction. This felt like real labor. And so immediately I got up and I went to the bathroom, and there was more bloody show, and I had another mild contraction almost immediately after that while I was still in the toilet. I came out of the bathroom and I told Zach, I think maybe you should call my parents now. And I think maybe we should be going to the hospital now. So he called my parents. I went and got myself dressed. I got myself ready. He got himself ready. We packed the last minute things in the car. And as we were waiting for my parents to come, the contractions started coming strong, 5 minutes apart, and I was starting to get a little bit shaky. And for me, these are all signs that I am most definitely going into labor and we need to get to the hospital right away. I remember just walking the halls, shaking, excited. We went in and gave the kids one last kiss goodnight before we left. They were all sleeping, they didn't know. My parents lived like 10-15 minutes away from us, so it didn't take them long to get here. We hopped in the vehicle like as soon as they got here. We didn't stop and talk or nothing. We got in the vehicle, we left. On the way there, I had a few contractions, nothing crazy. They were still 5 minutes apart. They still felt kind of the same. At this point, I was thinking labor might be a little while yet. Zach was really sweet, and he had gotten the birth playlist that I had put together already. But I wanted to listen to the Christian hypnobirthing app just so I could like get the hang of practice breathing and practicing breathing through contractions, because I knew that helped me the most in my last labor. So we listened to the Christian hypnobirthing app, and I had my combs with me, which honestly helped so much. So every time a contraction came, I would just go into this state of breathing and trying so hard to focus on the breathing, trying to relax my face, trying to welcome the contraction, because I knew that each contraction was moving my baby further down, bringing me one step closer to meeting my baby. And I would squeeze those combs, and that all of that together really helped. We got to the hospital. Contractions were still about 5 minutes apart. There was one parking spot left right in front. It was perfect. So we walked in. That walk-in was rough. I was having mild, well, not mild, they were pretty intense contractions almost the entire way up. By the time we got to triage, I was having contractions 2 to 3 minutes apart. That little bit of walking from the vehicle up to triage was enough to get my body into like the next gear, the next stage. I'm pretty sure I was entering transition. Contractions started getting really rough. They hooked me up to monitors because after having a C-section, they really want to monitor the baby to make sure everything's going well. So they hooked me up to monitors, and they started asking the questions, and I was breathing through contractions every few minutes, and we were watching the clock, and at this point it was 10 minutes to midnight. We were watching the minutes go by, getting closer and closer and closer to midnight, and midnight hit, and we were like, all right, I guess this baby is not going to be born on their due date, and their birthday is going to be August 18th. We told the nurses and the doctors that I have a history of fast labors, and I'm not sure if they didn't fully take me seriously or if they were just really busy. I think they were really busy that night, and so they were probably just preoccupied with a lot of other stuff. But we sat in triage for quite some time, and most of that time that we sat in there was nobody else in there with us. It was just me and Zach in the room, me having these really intense contractions. I was hooked up to monitors, and we were just sitting there waiting. A nurse came in, asked us questions, and then a medical student came in and asked us questions. And then I think there was another nurse, or then the doctor came in. I'm not sure. It's all kind of a blur, but it felt like we just sat there forever. I actually found that I didn't want to move around during these contractions. I didn't want to walk. I did not want to bend over. I was feeling these contractions really, really heavily, like deep down, not really in my belly. I was feeling the contractions really in my hips and lower back. And so when I got a contraction, bending over did not feel good. Moving around did not feel good, because that's where the pain was. I was kind of sitting back in the bed like this, cross-legged. That's what felt best for me at that time, was simply just sitting there, cross-legged, kind of leaning back. As the contractions got stronger, I was actually like lifting myself up off the bed. That's what felt best at that point, was it somehow just like took some pressure off, just lifting my butt off the bed a little bit. And I was squeezing those combs. Time goes on, it's close to 12:30 in the morning. Contractions started getting really intense and more frequent. I think they were like every 1 to 2 minutes. The combs weren't helping anymore. The breathing wasn't helping anymore. And I knew at this point I had to start like low moaning to get through these. And I knew when these contractions started to hit, that baby was almost here. So I started low moaning through these contractions, and then finally a doctor came in. And this was the first time that I had had a cervical check this entire pregnancy. At this point, I could hardly move. Like, getting out of the bed to take off my pants and to lie down was a real challenge. But she checked me and she's like, so are you more optimistic or pessimistic? And I'm like, optimistic, definitely. She's like, how far along do you think you are? And I said, 8 centimeters. She said, 9 centimeters. Let's get you in that birthing room. And I said, praise God, praise God, praise God. I was so grateful because these contractions at this point were so intense. And I was just so grateful to know that, like, we were going to the birthing room and this baby was just about to come, because I didn't know how much more of this I could handle. I got back up into sitting position. Again, just sitting on the bed, like lifting myself up off the bed, and low moaning through contractions. And then all of a sudden I had one contraction that I started to feel a little bit pushy. And I turned to Zach and I said, I don't think we're gonna make it. I think we're gonna have a baby right here, right now. And then at that moment, the nurse came in with the wheelchair. And so somehow I managed to get myself off the bed. They got a hospital gown on me. I managed to sit down. They started running down the halls. Here's where things get really crazy. On the way from triage to the delivery room, I had maybe 1 or 2 contractions, and my water broke during one of these contractions. And after my water broke, I could not help but push. My body naturally started pushing, and I couldn't stop it. As I was being wheeled down the hall, I'm thinking, like, I'm gonna have a baby in this chair right here, right now. Like, this is crazy. Oh, I don't know what's going on. I'm feeling a little bit panicky and scared. But also the pain was so intense and I could not control my body. I'm sitting in the wheelchair. I'm like trying to lift myself up off the wheelchair and manage this pain while my body's pushing. And we finally get to the room. I get up onto the bed. A doctor walks in. They're trying to quickly fill him in on everything that's going on. Someone asked if they could put up the stirrups so I could, like, lie down and give birth the way that, you know, the way that they like women to give birth in hospitals. And I said, no, I don't want to lie down. Like, lying down made things so much more painful. And so I just kind of sat there on the edge of the bed. Honestly, there wouldn't have been time to get me set up like that anyway, because immediately after they asked that, I had another contraction and I started pushing. And I could not stop myself. And the doctor barely sat down in time.
Or you want to just
I don't want to lay on my back.
Okay. All right.
You want to just stick the drape underneath her like this?
Yeah.
It's gonna have to be IM.
Like that.
Deep breaths. Deep breath.
Okay, that's good. Okay, whoa, no. Just slow out.
Just small
Just
pushes.
push. That's a girl.
Off that a girl.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, just like that. Just
Breathe. Just little wee
just
pushes,
breathe
like
this
3 second
baby out.
pushes.
Yeah, just like that. Okay, that's good.
My eyes were closed and my body was just pushing, and I just remember feeling incredible pain and people telling me to slow down, They're like, that's good. Okay, try not to push, slow down. But I couldn't help it. I was trying. My body was just doing it and I couldn't stop myself. The contraction started slowing down and I looked down and I saw her head. I saw her face looking up at me. Her head was fully out and I didn't even know it. And I looked down at her and I put my hand on her head. And then I reached down with both hands and I pulled her out and onto my chest. And it was everything that I had hoped and prayed for. As I brought her up onto my chest, I looked and I turned to Zach and I said, it's a girl. It's a girl. And I laid her on my chest and she cried. And it was the cutest little girly cry And then she stopped crying and she just laid there so content and so happy, and I just felt the biggest relief. I felt so relieved to have her there, to have the pain stopped, and she was on my chest, and it was the most beautiful, magical feeling. It happened so fast and so suddenly, but it was just everything that I ever could have wanted and more. Everything from that first contraction to her in my arms was 2 hours, almost exactly 2 hours. Keeping on our track record of fast labors, my first was 2.5, my second was 1.5, and she was 2 hours. So right in that like 2-hour range. It was amazing. And then I just laid there with her on my chest. I didn't tear, so there was no stitching necessary. Zach got to cut the cord and I got to actually watch it happen this time. Then when it was time to birth the placenta, I actually got to watch the whole thing. And it was so cool. This whole pregnancy, I had prayed, Lord, I just want this to be a redemptive birth. I want to experience it fully and so presently. I just want to be so much a part of this birth. I don't want a lot of medical intervention. I don't want a lot of people in the room. I want to be very in the moment. And he gave me that and so much more. Just the fact that I got to pull her out, that was incredible. That was the most beautiful experience and I'm so grateful. So we kind of settled down. Things got tidied up and Zach and I just sat there in awe of this beautiful little person. She started searching for milk immediately. And she latched on immediately. And so we were just sitting there and nursing and doing skin to skin. Then the time came where they had to start checking for bleeding. And in order to do that, they push on your stomach. It's painful. Each time they pushed on my stomach, I lost a lot of blood. There were a lot of blood clots. This is the same thing that happened to me after Theo was born. My babies come so fast. They're born so quickly. The doctor explained it as the uterus gets tired and then it doesn't do its job of contracting properly. And so blood can pool in the uterus, causing blood clots and severe bleeding. It's something that needs to be taken care of right away. So I was losing a lot of blood. Each time they pushed on my stomach, lots came out. They called the doctor in. I don't even know who the doctor was. It was whoever was on call, but honestly, he did a fantastic job. He was so relaxed and calm and laid back. But what he did next, I was not expecting. He had to stop the bleeding. And in order for him to stop the bleeding, he literally had to put his entire hand up me and fish around for any remaining blood clots. Honestly, I'm surprised that they didn't take Anna away from me. The pain was intense, not as bad as giving birth, truthfully. Giving birth was more. But I wasn't prepared for that, and all of a sudden he put his hand up there and he got the blood clots out. He did what he had to do. But wow, that was a minute or two of that and he was done. And the bleeding slowed down. They had an IV in me and they hooked me up to some oxytocin, which went for the next like 6 hours, I believe. My bleeding slowed down significantly after that and everything was all good and dandy and fine. After an hour or two of just sitting there, recovering and soaking her in, she was weighed and measured. I got myself up and into the shower and cleaned up and I was feeling so good. That is Annabeth's birth story. It was amazing. Honestly, like I've just been reliving that moment over and over and over in my head and I'm so excited to go back and to edit the footage that we managed to catch. It's gonna be a very real raw birth vlog. I'm sure, I mean, you've probably already seen it by now. Man, it was beautiful. And all glory and honor and praise be to our God. He is faithful and he is so, so good. Miss Annabeth is starting to wake up and fuss, so she's getting a little bit hungry. So I'm gonna go feed her. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one.